And I think it's okay. So I start the recording. So today's session, March 27, we are going to talk a very interesting topic today, at least personally for me. I also plan to write my project work of final year in masters on this topic. I don't know if it will get accepted, but we'll see. So the topic is around psychological time in contrast to the physical clock. And this has a lot of footprint into a lot of work on psychology. And it also has a lot of touch points into the philosophical aspects of a lot of philosophical leaders who have been talking about this, right? So what we'll try and unveil it one at a time. Hi, Megha. We are talking about psychological time today. So in bit, no, Megha is still joining, but yeah, we'll see. Yeah, hi, Megha. We are starting, Megha. So in between when the discussion starts, join in and pitch in and whatever you want to do, right? So let me start sharing my screen. Let me know once all of you can see it. I cannot see all of you on video when I start sharing my screen. So if you're doing thumbs up, etc., I will not be able to see. So speak out if you can see my screen. I think that would be good.
I can see it.
Good. Okay, so let's start. So roughly, I have some 10-15 slides, and then we jump on to discussion. So psychological time. We are going to try and see what psychological time definitions people have done. We see the functions of psychological time, why it is important. We talk about prospective and retrospective timing and what it means in terms of psychological time. We talk about attention and prospective timing. And we also talk about boredom, blood pressure aspects, maladaptive behavior, which is rooted in boredom, which is rooted in psychological time. So we'll touch upon some of these topics and see, first understand what people have been talking about psychological time, and then in that context, let's see if our personal experiences and our personal beliefs or knowledge come into play, then we share it with the group. So psychological time. No understanding of human behavior can be complete without referring to notion of time, right? Our entire life has some kind of time dimension to it. And what we have is that the importance of time in humans' life is never in dispute. We always, everybody right from very early days have known the importance of time somehow in their bones, if you like, right? And the most naive aspect of understanding what time could be is the duration dimension. There could be a lot of other dimensions, but duration dimension is at least one of the standard dimension that we say is with which we can calculate time. So a duration of something in your head or duration outside in physical world is maybe the most naive representation of meaning of time. And what we understand also is that it serves important functions, right? It's there for purpose. It's ingrained in us for certain functions to play in our day-to-day life. So let's look at it very quickly in terms of what are the functions that it could be playing. So what we psychologists have spoken about is we should be able to make the judgment of the duration to deal with similar events when encountered in future. As simple as if I'm going to travel today from my place to my office and I have a rough idea of how much it's going to take, then I can plan my event to reach in time, for example, all right? It also has an important aspects at a metacognition. Metacognition is looking at your own thoughts, thinking about thoughts, for example. It has an important aspects of experiences of cognitive and metacognitive system to try and change your own behavior. So even there, the time comes in picture. And in conversation, so as very simple example is if a party A asks questions, so I ask question to Pilar, and the latency with which Pilar is going to answer to that question versus my expectation, I will either trust or not trust that answer, saying, she knows or she doesn't know. So I ask a very complicated question, what is life, Pilar? And I'm expecting Pilar to say, pause, and knowing Pilar, she's going to answer in maybe 10 seconds something, right? And if she answers, I'm interested, I'm trusting her instincts of the answer and go ahead, for example, right? So even in conversations and the latency with which the conversation is taking place and the expectation of the party, something as big as trust or mistrust in that conversation also is playing the role from a psychological time dimension, if you like. So that's still the yardstick that we do, both in external world and internal, which is psychological world. Now, something very interesting, and feel free to stop me at any point in time. But now something, and after this 2 slides, at least I stop and then continue for other slides, is the prospective and retrospective timing. So now in psychological time, what is a prospective time? So prospective time is when the related duration of an ongoing interval, the observer is aware and judging. So for example, I'm filling a bottle of water, and now I'm being aware of how much time I'm taking to fill this water. That's prospective psychological time. Retrospective psychological time is when you judge the duration when the interval of the target event completes. So it's retrospecting, looking, oh, how much time happened now. So when that event is happening, you are not really judging the time. You're not spending cognitive efforts to look at how much time is going on as of now, but you look at it after the particular target interval goes. So just setting the context, prospective and retrospective. These are the two dimensions of looking at psychological time. And what is not clear so far in the studies is that if the subjective experiences associated between these two are similar, we are not sure about that. But the information processing that we do has a very clear influence on these two types. And that is what we will see in the next slide. How we process information has a direct correlation on how the psychological time reflects in prospective, which is while you are aware of the time when the process is going on, versus retrospective, when you're not aware, but then you look at it after the interval of whatever target has been achieved. The interesting part is this to go contradictory to each other, so opposite to each other. What this means is that from a retrospective perspective, if you're trying to recollect or retrospect or ruminate, if you like, any psychological process of recollection of a complex context, you will feel that what had happened so far psychologically was a long period. Similarly, if there is something where you're processing a complex information, irrespective of how much time on clock had happened in the past, if that information processing itself is complex, you will feel that you had spent a lot of time on it. Exactly opposite is true for prospective now. So while you are doing a very complex work, while doing it, if there is some cognitive threads, if you like, which are keeping time tap, if you're doing too much complex work, you will feel that the time is slower or lesser, if you like, right? Because the amount of capacity you are giving to actually look at the psychological time is less. And if you have less gates, you will look at the time in a less span, right? So you will not feel that the time is going too slow, right? For example, so it's exactly opposite. If you try to recollect the entire, some complex thing that you had taken a decision over 1-2 hours, you were in a problem, psychological or physical world problem, and you solved it, and it had a lot of anxiety movements into it, and so very, very hard decision to make. When you try to remember it, say if it was 1 hour of your life, you will feel that that 1 hour was very, very, very big. Versus if you try to remember, I went to a coffee corner, I drank a coffee, it was a nice coffee, I came back. Very simple. You will feel that that 1 hour was like, okay, 5 minutes, for example, just setting a context. So complexity and the amount of contextual changes and the amount of information processing, the retrospective psychological time is always more, versus in the current, it's exactly the opposite. If it is more contextual changes are happening, if the complex information processing is very complex, which maybe now it's happening with you, then in the last 10 minutes, you would not have felt that it's 10 minutes. You might have hooked on to saying, did we really pass 10 minutes, right? So that's the very, very essential cornerstone for me to understand how we perceive psychological time in this two prospective and retrospective dimension. And that is where the timeline of our psychological life in different contexts and experiences is different, right? And that is where the movement could be understood. So before we move on to the next part around these topics, I would want to pause here and open up to the group on what's making sense, what's not. What do you think about what we heard so far? Well, we are just trying to still understand the movement of psychological time, if you like. Yeah? We're just trying to understand that yet. We are not going ahead, just trying to understand how it moves in our heads.
There are, this is Abhinav, there are two things which I want to talk about. Not necessarily or eventually related, or probably it will be, but I don't know.
Sure.
Two perspectives of time is when something is happening in life, it looks like that it is taking a lot of time. It is moving very slow. Like if you look at the people who are married and have kids and they have seen them growing. So every day when it was being lived, it was a long day. And day over day over day over year, when we look back, now my son is 10, my daughter is going to be 3. Son gonna be 11 and daughter gonna be 3. And when we look back, it's just like, wow, so much time has just passed.
Right.
So same thing which has happened in two different contexts. One at one time it's looking like that it's very slow, another time, oh gosh, it's just passed.
Yes.
And another perspective on the complexity of the work. If I am dealing with a problem as a dog with a bone, some problem is there in production or in some of the system, and it's complex. It's not visible what the solution or what the even problem is. The amount of effort and the time put in towards finding that solution may be more than what it perceive.
Yes.
That I have put in. So I might be working for 2 hours, 3 hours, would have skipped my lunch. It is already 4 o'clock. My internal system is crying and craving for sugar, but still my mind and would be like, oh, that was a good problem to solve. Finally, we did it.
Yes.
Now what?
No, a very, very good, insightful thing, right, Abhinav? And this children thing, I think I can relate so much to it, right? My daughter is suddenly 9, right? But the day doesn't pass when she now is fighting with me or trying to get my attention, or we are arguing on something. The day doesn't pass, but years do. And how many times have we heard this? The days don't pass, but the years do. And this is the prospective versus retrospective that we saw psychologically, right? That they exactly are opposite. And this is how psychological time is working. So when you are in prospective, when you are in tap of the time in the process, if that is slower, then from a retrospective, it would be faster. While if you're keeping the time tap in the prospective now, and if it's faster in retrospective, you will feel it slower, right? So that just again brings in this real understanding of this prospective retrospective lines going opposite, right, for the psychological time. Thank you for sharing that, Abhinav. Anybody else? Anything on this from your side?
Two examples came to mind right now while listening. One, I don't know over there in India, but in Mexico, we say that if you're staring, when you put water to boil, that if you're staring at it, it will take it longer to boil. And if you leave the water alone and you go and do something else, for example, you're going to make pasta or you are cutting the vegetables, then the water will be boiling very quickly. And it's funny because even if you're not watching the water, but someone else in the kitchen is watching the water seems to take longer to boil. And they tell you, don't stare at the boiling pot of water because it won't boil. Try to do it one day and you'll see that. See, Alexandra is laughing too, because
It's quantum physics. You alter by your mind and your attention the effect of reality.
okay,
Yeah.
that is one. But the other, I don't know when things started getting difficult with the COVID situation in India, but here in Mexico, this past week, it's when we got to the 1 year mark of when you say, okay, we've been in lockdown for a year, or we have been quarantined for a year. And you say, wow, it's been a year. And now it seems like it hasn't been so long. But I remember these days a year ago, and it was like, okay, the clock, the clock seems to be going backwards. Because could this be something of perspective and retrospective psychological timing, or how we
Yes.
it
And again,
seems too long?
Yeah, again, and welcome, Geeta ma'am. I mean, Geeta ma'am is a psychologist under whom I did my internship, so it's awesome to have you. I think she's still connecting the audio. There is something wrong, but let her come through. Yeah, and this is where Isabel, what you said is such an important aspect from this entire thing to understand, right? That today we feel that 1 year went fast, and now if we believe that this prospective and retrospective are going opposite, which means that most of us felt that this 1 year went so fast, which indeed means that in prospective psychological time, it went extremely slow for us, and it had a big toe on our psychology, right? So if somebody steps back and says, hey, that time passed away so fast, we should be worried, because in prospective time scale, it would have gone so slow, and that would have played its trick on our psychology so much. It would have its own toe. We need a vacation, right?
Yes. We need a vacation. And yes, it's right. The year since I live alone, especially the first 2 or 3 months, I didn't even go out of my apartment. So my only company were the dogs and the cleaning lady that came twice a week. So of course, for me, the psychological weight of that, especially for the first few months, was a lot. And I think that that's what made it so complicated for so many people.
Yeah. And I mean, then that's again, just to reiterate, right? For our own understanding, and maybe as psychologists, or even as friends, if we are trying to talk to our friends, I think the wonderful aspect that we are stumbling upon is the following: that if somebody, and if we feel, let's talk about ourselves, if we feel that psychologically, from a psychological time yardstick perspective, if a big duration went out very fast, which means that in the prospective, in the every situation and every minute of that time scale, we felt it very slow, and that took a toll on us, which means we need to look at it from that dimension. Versus if we look back and now say, oh, the year went very, very slow, maybe in the things that we were doing, it was extremely, extremely fast, which means we did not have time to even look at the time, right? So that's a very nice angle to look at for our own selves, how much psychological burn down, if you like, we had. A very nice yardstick to tell. If the last 2 years have gone very fast for you, it did take a toll on you from a retrospective, prospective scales that we just discussed. So Geeta ma'am, can you hear us?
Yeah, I'm really sorry I joined late, but it's interesting.
No problem. We'll catch up. I'll again refer the slide that we are. So I was just introducing everybody to you. That I mean, you are the one under whom I did my internship. So it's awesome to have you here in this group.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, but I mean, anybody else? I see some thoughtful faces. Anybody else wants to add on this, or even contradict this? So any insights from anybody?
I have a thoughtful face.
Yes, you have a thoughtful DP.
Yeah. So it is really interesting to talk about psychological time, because one of the book I like most, all the book I have read so far in my life, is The Ending of Time. It was the 15th conversation between J. Krishnamurti and David Bohm, and in that book they were talking about the ending of psychological time. And here we are trying to uncover what is the mechanism of psychological time. So as I understand, whenever the time is involved, there is a there is a connectivity with something. As Jamin, you were pointing out, to go from point A to point B, there is a correlation. There is some kind of comparison. But uh, uh, but at the same time, and we are still. I saw the next slide. You are going to talk about attention, which is again another really interesting point. And I, as I understand, if there is an if there is a process of thinking involved, if there is a process of projection and thinking about past, thinking about future, the projection of the images from past and the projection of future, all these things are involved, then there is always a timing is going on in psychologically in our head. But when there is a state of complete attention, or there is if there is no effort involved in the moment you are living, like right now, there is no effort I am having to talk about something, or to listen all of you, or to see the slides. Can I think about time? Can I look at the clock and see, even I understand that the clock is ticking, but psychologically, if there is no effort involved, if there is a complete state of attention involved, then if there is any kind of psychological time going on in one's head, this question is something which really intrigues me. And
yeah, it's a good inquiry to make. It's a good inquiry to make. I mean, we'll talk about it a little bit. Yes, for sure. It's a good inquiry to make. Yeah, there's one of the slides where it talks about something like that. I mean, we talk about, even if it is an illusion, it's still an information, right? So and it's being processed by your cognition. So even if you believe it's an illusion, or I mean, it's still information. It's still, you process that information also, that it's an illusion. So yeah. Okay, if no, so Pilar, I see your comments on the chat. Let's come to that slowly, right? Let me cover some of the slides, and then we again open up for discussion. So I hope you can see my slides back again. So what we spoke about just before this was, why is the slide not going back? Yeah, so we spoke about psychological time in terms of retrospective and prospective. So, and we spoke that they both go opposite direction. So if you have complex information processing happening, or there are more contextual changes, in retrospection, the psychological time looks a lot more, while prospective, which is in the current, if I'm looking at the time, and if there are more contextual changes, if the information is less, I mean, complex information processing is more, then in current, I would feel the time really opposite, right? So I would feel it less, for example. And that is where I think Abhinav gave a very good, the days don't pass, but years do. COVID situation, the days were not passing, but we are 1 year mark, right? And it plays a toe on our psychology aspect. When we look at from a retrospective perspective, something is very fast, prospective was very heavy on us. Okay, so attention. At any given moment, attentional resources are divided between all concurrent tasks that need to be carried out simultaneously, including timing, right? And there is a lot of study and white papers around this topic. I've given some references. So what this means is, and we come to what is complete attention, what Paritosh was trying to point towards by the end of it, but from all practical purposes, wherever you need to give attention, today you're giving attention on the screen, you are giving attention to what Jamin is saying, you may be giving attention to your own thoughts, etc. So all of this, our attentional resources are divided, and one of that attentional resources also, or one or more attentional resources also looking at the timing now, the psychological timing. And how is that important? So there are two theories around this. One is called attentional gate theory, and one is dynamic switch theory. But they also both eventually come down to a point that, okay, if the tasks are simpler, the time interval feels longer. So what we were talking about, retrospective versus prospective. So in prospective, if you're doing something very simple, your actually time is going very slowly. You're not able to consume your time as fast as something that is much more complex and requires a lot of attention from your side. Very simple reason being there are much more resources available which has attention on time now. And so if you give more time to calculate time, the resources are now, I mean, imagine you have 5 resources for attention, out of which 1 you are using for something very simple. Now you have 4 resources to now suddenly look at the time, if you are doing that. So all of these pulses that these are capturing, they all get accumulated as psychological time. So when you're doing something simple, you have 4 resources and 4 pulses of, say, physical clock multiplied by 4, that's the psychological time. But if you now have 4 resources gone in complete attention on what you're trying to do, because it's a complex work, the 5th is now only one which is looking at time, so it is very limited. You don't have that time perception in the prospective, in the current situation. In retrospective, you might feel it much more if you try to recollect, right? So that is what these gate theories talk about from an attention point of view. And now from an attention, we come to the other side of the spectrum, which is boredom. And this is again one of my favorite topics, if you like, right? So sorry, so boredom. Yeah, the screen is not going somehow into the, yeah, I don't know, I'll maybe go into this mode. I think everybody can see it then. Okay, so boredom. So boredom is defined as unique psychological state possessing interrelated and inseparable emotional, motivational, perceptual, and all the related cognitive functions, right? This is what O. Henlon is talking about since 1981, for example. Now, situational boredom is experience when one finds him or herself in the situation in which most of one's attention resources are free and not allocated to a specific task, which demands information processing. It could be simple tasks, so you are not really putting all your resources on it. So some of it goes towards time. Then difference between boredom and situations like leisure or play is that the later absorbs your activity. I'm playing tennis and I'm absorbed in playing tennis. So my senses towards time disappear, time goes faster, right? Then people characterized as having high blood pressure, for example, now tend to experience boredom even in situations where the level of stimulation required to information processing are normal. So where generally normal people would feel much more engaged, a blood pressure person could have the symptoms of blood pressure because at that point in time also there is a lot of resources being spent on time, right? So the stimulus for attention capturing for a person with high blood pressure, for example, or in general blood pressure problems, they have a relation to the amount of boredom, which is again amount of resources or attention you give to the time dimension, right? Which comes in. Very important relation now to boredom, and I'll come to one philosophical aspect of boredom a little later, but one important talk about boredom is that more you have boredom, there is maladaptive behavior setting in, right? What is maladaptive behavior? Which stops you from taking up new things or changes or even difficult circumstance. You just become lethargic even psychologically and you don't adapt your behavior. So, and this has root in boredom. So boredom and lack of curiosity were reported to be the most common cause of drug use. Now people are bored, they use drugs, right? 1974, there was a report. Bored students were rated more often as maladjusted by teachers in comparison to other students. Blood pressure problems, we talked about that. And then there is this regression, Freud onwards, right? So Freud onwards, Sigmund Freud onwards, there is this topic about regression. And what happens with this regression is moving back in psychological time when one is faced with stress. So you move back, as soon as you have stress, you move back, part of maladaptive behavior automation, where you move back to a comfortable, childish or primitive states. So now you are not really adapting, but you try to go back to it. For example, one of the primitive states could be anger, or other state could be really being sad, crying, and self-pity, victim mindset, if you like, right? So when you feel you have stress, you go back to that childish or primitive state, and that becomes part of your maladaptive behavior, which has root in boredom, which has root in the amount of attention you have given to your time in the psychological aspects. So I mean, without there are a few more things, but I'll not go. I think we discussed some of these things. Two last points. What I want to talk about is that if you can note in this, it's a very interesting point that the other pole of boredom we term as flow. Right, a person is in flow. The player is in flow. Is a state of peak enjoyment, energetic focus, and creative concentration. Right, it's exactly opposite to boredom. And you see how psychological time play over there. Right, so if you understand the movement of psychological time and somehow keep a tap on it, you can be into the flow rather than on the boredom, which has then maladaptive, and then there is a vicious circle, right? You bore, so you have maladaptive, you have maladaptive symptoms, so you get bored, and it continues towards lethargism, right? Or even worse. And then there is this very powerful quote from, I don't know how many people have read this book. It's a good book, Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. So he tells, and it's not philosophical, right? What he tries to tell is a very interesting point that nothing has happened in past. It happened in the now, right? And nothing will ever happen in the future. It will happen only in the now, right? And this brings to the point what even Paritosh was trying to tell, that if it is happening in the now, everything else is just psychological time travel, and you're not in the now where the things are actually happening. So you're not in touch with the things that are happening, right? You're just time traveling. And this is comes to your point, Pilar, that you put on the chat, that when you're stuck in a memory, right, that memory is not what has happened in the past. It happened in the now, and your memory is happening again in the now for it. So you're stuck in a psychological loop which is not in the now, and hence the suffering, and hence the maladaptive behavior, where you go from maladaptive behavior to boredom to victim mindset, and then it continues, right? So it's if you look at it, really look at it in terms of practical approach, not psychological. And this is a very powerful statement for me, is like nothing has happened in past, and it happened in the now, and nothing will ever happen in the future. It will happen in the now. So now is all you have, right? Easier said than done when we are stuck in the loop of psychological rumination, if you like. But the reality from that, the reality from that is that that's how your prospective and retrospective times are clashing with each other, right? But I'm done with my presentation, open for discussion. I see a lot of chat. Okay, so yeah.
And even in the, if I may interrupt a bit,
Yes.
Even in the state of boredom, there is a certain kind of attention. The attention is still there, and the attention is that this self or the I is not having this entertainment or engagement with what the activity is going on. So then there is another kind of projection and the duality, and the attention is just creating the conflict between what the activity is going on, and at the same time how this is having this engagement from your thoughts, or from your perspective, or from the self the one is projecting, the subject is projecting.
Yeah, true. But I mean, to Pilar's question, and that's the at least even my reality, right? The reality is that when you remember, as Pilar wrote, when you remember, that remembrance is in now, and the suffering is in now. So we can say that that happened in past, or that did not happen in past. It happened in now, but that memory, that remembrance, is happening in now, and I'm suffering in it now, right? So that's the psychological time we build up in our head, and we saw retrospective and prospective. And now when you're stuck in that, if you can see that movement. Yeah, Pilar, please.
Yes, and it has to do with a number of things. I was talking in the chat about the resentment, that literally it means to feel again. And it's like when somebody does something to you. Let's suppose that Alessandra comes and she smacks me. And I go with Isabel, and Alessandra smacked me. So now she smacked me twice. And then I go with Ano, and then I go with Paritosh, and then I go with Gitangari, and then I go with Yemen, and then I go, and I go, and I go, and I go. And in the end of the day, each time I tell her, she has been smacking me. It's a miracle I'm complete with all my bones after all the times she smacked me, because I kept saying it and feeling it and living it. And somehow my reality becomes a trap.
Yes.
And that is one of the problems that I see with myself and with basically everybody I know, that
Yes.
they live and relive the same moment forever, and
Yes.
it becomes a trap
Yes.
because
Yes.
it's not a one-time event and it's not in context. I used to have a good friend who was sponsored for AAs, and she said, no, 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 no. Watch the whole film. Why did she smack you? Why did she smack you? Watch the full film. You just go rewind and play, rewind and play, rewind and that fragment of reality. And it's driving you crazy, and you don't see the whole thing. You don't get into her shoes. You don't do this, you don't do that, and everything. She's amazing. I mean, she's gone through hell herself, but just thinking about this perspective of watch the whole film and stop the rewind and play, because you become trapped like a dog chasing the tail. And that with the psychological time doesn't let you progress. And when you finally realize that this choice you had of reliving things because the feeling was so much, your mind couldn't put a hold on it and put it to the side, and you look back and you say, oh my God, I've lost 15 years of my life because Alessandra, that tyrant, she smacked me. That horrible person, she smacked me. And for her, it's her fault that my 15 years of my life have gone to the it's not her fault. Who was trapped in the cycle? I was. And what happened with the real time versus the psychological time? In my time, I was trapped in a memory, I was trapped in an age, I was trapped in a circumstance that wouldn't let me go.
Yeah.
Like reliving the same level of the video game. So it's interesting to also think about this part of the psychological time when we don't learn how to use it wisely, because we never consider it. It's just like boom, never even hits the forehead. Zoom, the concept goes and goes and goes, and we never stop to really just going around what is going on. And that was all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Pilar. Thank you, Pilar. I think one of the things around playing the entire movie is what Isabel also put on chat, an unresolved issue, right? Play it fully, once and for all, settle it, right? At least for you. And I think this reliving this, I mean, we all have some other people who have seen a lot in their lives, right? Or suffered a lot in their lives. I had a friend like that, and uh, we had a very honest discussion on a coffee on this topic. And then I asked him, you know, if you really have to put the percentage of your life suffering, actual versus thought based, reliving it again and again and again and again, right? What is that percentage? And then he took a moment to analyze, and he said, you know, the actual painful things that happen in my life is only 3%. 97%, I have been reliving it. Can you imagine by end of your life, we did not suffer because Alessandra spanked us at all. It was 1% maybe. 99% because we just ruminated. And as Pilar said, it didn't even hit our forehead. We didn't even observe it. It was like, poof. It was just hitting us emotionally again and again and again and again and again. Right? But that's the reality. I mean, that is our reality today. I mean, talking about, yeah, I can see it and I should overcome it and etc. It's fine, but we really feel that's the reality of our bones right today. That's the feeling we have. And we live it. And we have to see it. And what does it mean to see it is a whole different game. But yeah, I should stop talking. Anybody else, any viewpoint? Ma'am, Gita ma'am, are you caught up with what we were trying to discuss so far?
Yeah, very interesting, very interesting.
Any experiences, any cases, ma'am, that you would want to share around this topic, or your experiences around this topic?
Yes, I see that in counseling, when it comes, most of them are suffering because of, the rumination, going back thinking the same thing, trapped completely into that, and not able to come out or not able to think something beyond that. So it's a rumination, or it's that, as you tell, that 3% is the suffering, but 97% is what the rumination, and living that moment makes a person more painful and not able to do something else. So that's really, really interesting. Marina came with a very good example. That's also, thank you so much for coming up with a very simple example, but it really makes me open up.
And that's a two-sided sword, this knowledge, if you like, right? But for people like me, it goes even next level crazy. Because first, people ruminate and be sad.
Yeah.
So I ruminate and be sad like any other human. I'm a human. But I be further sad because I know I'm ruminating and becoming sad, which I should not be doing, right? So it's a second level of crazy, if you like, right? And that's where as I always like to tell, right? I mean, two of my very favorite, one is my sentence, one is my daughter's sentence, right? One is, you can't talk about silence and space. It's contradictory, right? You can't talk about silence and space. You need to have silence and space. The part to it is it. And second, I ask my daughter always, and it's her favorite answer now, and at 9 years, it's become mantra of her life. And I ask her how to be happy. And her answer is by being happy. Right? And these are the two very, very, very simple and powerful tools for a second level crazy person like me then comes into play sometimes. we have to simplify things. Anu, Megha, Alessandra.
Yeah, hi. I can hear my own voice, but it's strange. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking like ruminating is being criticized a lot, but when I see these websites like how to be happy, like I mean, every one of us might have Googled it at some point. One of the tips they give is think about how your day was. So I'm thinking of this reliving your whole day. And at this point, I would like to say that I normally never get from morning to evening, because by the time I reach the afternoon phase, I'm like maybe caught up in that reliving phase and then never quite come to the end of the day while rethinking. But I'm thinking there's something to reliving things that is important and makes people happy, and write journals. So I guess it might have a good side. A psychological time might have a pro to that, which is why human beings have evolved to thinking retrospectively.
No, very good point. Very good point. I mean, in general context, when we talk about rumination, in this context is always ruminating the bad experience, right? But recollecting a good memory, recollecting something, if that keeps you sane to not bump in a door and know that you have to open the door before you walk through, that's worth it. let's recollect good memories so that I know I'm sane to open the door, right? So whatever works. But in this context, rumination was generally in terms of ruminating on bad memories, bad experience, and reliving that, right? So that was the context.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was just a joke. Like, I mean, we should not go back in that cycle. But then again, like I just heard a TED talk today where they were saying, what if you want to become an expert at something? They actually, there was this experiment where they kept like two sets of basketball players. One that was made to physically practice for 2 weeks consistently, and another team that was made to just imagine all the possible scenarios and practice basketball. And at the end of it, when both the teams were made to play against each other, they noticed that at the intermediate level, both the teams, each one that had only thought of the scenarios, and one that had physically practiced, both of them had actually come to the same point, which means our neural pathways, or the things that make us good at something or bad at something, like psychologically bad, are actually being strengthened just by thinking. And as Pele mentioned, that just the thought of smacking on the head, you could also rethink about like just playing your tennis match really perfectly, and that will make you good at it. Or if you think about someone who cussed at you during the match, that would be okay.
No, true, very true. Whatever works, as simple as that. Then Alessandra, Megha, Paritosh. I know Paritosh, you are thinking about why to think at all, right? but while we reach that point, I mean, the reality is we are thinking, right? And then in that case, whatever helps to keep us sane, to bring in that space to come to a point where we cannot think, or we can even start understanding what it is. I think that that space needs some work on our conditioned mind, right? And that's the space that we try to create.
And I just wanted to inform all of you that I really love to be a part of this meeting, and I'm so sorry for having this abrupt exit because I have this another meeting to join, and I'm already 25 minutes late. So
yeah, we are all
I talked to Gemini if we can, yeah, if we can move this meeting 30 minutes earlier if possible. So if that timing is works for everyone. So
we will put it for voting on the group, Paritosh. Let's see. Let's discuss that on the group then.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
Thank you.
Okay.
Paritosh.
So thank you and have a nice day, everyone.
Same to you, Paritosh.
Bye.
Megha, Alessandra, you have been quiet today.
Yes, sir. Interesting time. Not only because between physical time and psychological time. If,
Alessandra, you're breaking.
For example, if we're busy, time goes by faster. If we're having a good time, it goes faster as we perceive it. Not physically, I mean, a minute is a minute.
Yeah.
And also about the rumination, yes, I see it as a how would you say it, in a double blade sword or something of that sort.
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, yes, rumination does keep us stuck in the past. It brings the past back to the now constantly.
Yes.
And sometimes, but and it keeps us from moving on. But sometimes a bit of rumination is needed for closure, to understand something and close it. And it reminds me of where I was a few years ago, that I would ruminate a lot. But I needed that time to fully understand what had happened with him, with our divorce. I needed also to bump into Dr. Ramani and understand narcissism, to say, okay, this is what happened. Now I understand it. Now I can identify the pattern.
Yeah.
Okay. Time to move on.
Yeah. No, that's a very interesting angle. We need to ruminate to even understand what happened with us sometimes, right? We don't even know what happened. So maybe that's another way of coming to terms with or understanding what's happening, right? Before we even try.
But not too much that it keeps us stuck in the past.
Well, but who knows what too much is? That's the problem, right? So once you go down the rabbit hole, it's like, as Anu says, if you are ruminating about good things, you are just training to ruminate, which means you will end up ruminating bad one day again. I mean, where do we draw line, right? And where does the rabbit hole end? That's the problem. Maybe. Okay, sounds good. I think at least I'll stop the recording.